Chapter 2. Marty Sullivan cast a sidelong glance at the gleaming Airstream trailer that served as an on-site office for the strip mall that he was supposed to have been almost done by now. It was only last week, however, that the framework began to climb above the underground parking lot of the town of Eastbury, Massachusetts. Pissant regulations, as far as he was concerned. Not that anybody ever listened to him, but since they'd gotten held up on the garage, one of his boss's snafus had tried to blame him with just like always, but there wasn't a chance that they'd get the place framed and closed before New England's winter set in, which Marty knew meant that he and the rest of the crew would be shivering in a couple of months just as much as they'd been sweltering during the summer, which they were stuck down in the pit of the parking garage, setting rebar and pounding forms without a breath of fresh air, and the heat in the 90s, the humidity to match. If he'd been in charge, but he wasn't in charge. And Jerry O'Donnell, the foreman, who had it in for Marty since the day he signed on to the job last June, wasn't going to listen to anything he had to say. Marty raised the middle finger of his left hand in a sour salute towards the Airstream, where he was pretty sure O'Donnell and the office girl were getting it on every day. He unscrewed the top of his thermos and took a long gulp. Though the liquid was only lukewarm, the warmth of his brandy he had added to Myra's crappy coffee quickly spread through his gut. When the alcohol did nothing to brighten his mood, Marty tipped his thermos to his lips again, drinking it, then dropped the lid and the bottle back into his lunch bucket. A couple more hours and he could go home. Couple more hours of him working his butt off while O'Donnell cooled his in the Airstream. Maybe he should just go over there and get himself a little piece of the "Hey Marty," Kurt Winalski called from the far corner of the site. He and Bud Grimes were struggling with a large piece of prefab framing. "How about giving us a hand over here?" Glowering balefully at the trailer one last time, Marty heaved himself to his feet. "What's the matter? Thing too heavy for you guys?" Ambling across the newly hardened concrete, he tripped over a drain pipe that hadn't yet been trimmed, cussed under his breath, and then shoved Winalski aside. "Let me hold it while you get a rivet in." A piece of the metal framing, 10 feet tall and nearly as long, tilted as Winalski raised it. It nearly twisted out of Marty's hands, but Bud Grime reached out for it to steady it just before it fell. "I can do it," Marty growled. "Just get the damn rivet gun, Winalski." For a moment, Kurt Winalski seemed about to argue, but Marty's size and the look of half-drunken belligerence in his eyes made him think he better do it. Picking up the pneumatic rivet gun, he moved to the point where the two pieces of the framing met at a 90-degree angle, and used his left hand to try to line it up, matching the holes in the two components. Bud Grimes, his piece held steady, but the framing Marty Sullivan was trying to steady kept wavering back and forth. "Geez, Marty, how am I supposed to—" "Just shoot the damn thing," Marty growled. "What kind of dumb mother—" There was a sharp explosive sound as Winalski pulled the trigger of the rivet gun, followed by a scream of pain as Bud Grimes let go of the framing he was holding, clutching his left bicep. The framing crashed against the fence that stood between the foundation and the sidewalk beyond. Marty Sullivan took a step to one side, lost his balance, and tumbled to the ground, the metal framing falling on top of him. He struggled for a moment, but the prefabricated structure was too heavy. "Someone get this damn thing off of me," he yelled as the rest of the construction crew came racing over. The hell was Sullivan? Winalski shouted. It was his fault. Someone get the first aid kit for Bud. Bud Grimes had shrunk down onto a stack of framing, and his face ashen, his left sleeve crimson with blood, despite the fact that his right hand was still clamped over his wound. Someone started toward the site office when the door of the Airstream opened, and Jerry O'Donnell charged out with the first aid kit. "What happened?" he asked as he shouldered through the men crowded behind Bud Grimes. He crouched down and opened the first aid kit as Winalski began to explain, then began cutting away the sleeve of Grimes' shirt. "Get this goddamn crap off of me," Marty Sullivan howled, and finally 2 men picked up the enormous piece of prefab steel and tossed it aside. "I could have been killed," Marty complained, starting to get up, but then he dropped back down to the concrete. "Geez, I think my back is hurt." Jerry O'Donnell barely glanced at him. "Someone call an ambulance," he said. "Grimes need to go to the hospital." "I'm okay," Grimes complained, but his face was pale and damp with a sheen of sweat. "Just put a bandage on it and—" His words abruptly died as he tried to move his injured arm, and an agonizing pain shot through it. "You're not okay," O'Donnell replied. "Whatever. Went in there and didn't come back." "It was a rivet," Winalski replied. "Just as I pulled the trigger, Sullivan—" "It wasn't my fault," Marty bowled. "And if anybody needs an ambulance, it's me. My back's—" O'Donnell wheeled around to face him, his eyes hard and his expression was tight. "Your back's fine, Sullivan," he said. "But if you want, I'll sure have you taken to the hospital, and I'll have them test your blood for alcohol while you're there." Without thinking about it, Marty Sullivan was still on his feet, towering over the foreman, his fists clenched and his face only inches from O'Donnell's. But rather than backing away, O'Donnell was smiling at him. "Still want an ambulance?" he asked quietly. When Sullivan made no reply, he said, "The way I see it, you might want to be quitting, Sullivan." The other man burrowed his frown uncertainly. "Or would you prefer me to fire you?" "You can't fire me," Sullivan began, his voice still translucent, but less belligerent, less than a few moments earlier. "We got a union that says—" Again, O'Donnell didn't let him finish. "You got a union that says you can drink on the job?" "I never—" Sullivan began. "How dumb do you think I am, Sullivan?" O'Donnell said. "You think I can't smell the stink on your breath?" Sullivan lurched back a step, and O'Donnell moved closer. "You think everyone on this dock doesn't know what's in that thermos of yours?" He shook his head almost sadly. "It's dumb enough to be drinking on the job, but it's even dumber to think no one's going to notice. So here's the deal. You get your stuff, and you get off the site right now, and that'll be the end of it. And don't think anyone else in town will be hiring you, because I'll see to it that they don't. It's way too dangerous having someone like you around." "You can't do that," Sullivan yelped. "My union—" "Or we can go talk to the union about it," O'Donnell said, his words silencing the other man, though he had not raised his voice. "Both of us, in fact, will take the whole crew with us." He glanced around at a dozen of men who were now watching the confrontation. "How about it, guys? Want to go down to the union and defend Brother Sullivan?" None of the men responded, and as Marty Sullivan's eyes moved from one man to another, they either shook their heads, turned away from him, or edged closer to the foreman. "I'll have Rebecca cut your check right now, Sullivan," O'Donnell said. But Marty Sullivan was already walking away. "Screw off, O'Donnell," he said, the alcohol in his blood fueling the anger boiling inside him. "You think I'm gonna hang around here while that bitch tries to figure out how to do some real work?" Grabbing his jacket and his lunchbox and wondering where the nearest place to get a drink, Marty Sullivan shambled away from the site.